I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Hey everybody, I am back from Austin, Texas. I went there for a work trip and I love me a hotel robe and Law & Order SVU moment. So that was really fun. But tell me why I always think it's a good idea to watch a sad and emotional movie on the way back. I'm in the road. I've got this guy, reading a book. I've got this woman playing Sudoku, and I'm over here just sobbing about like gay conversion in America. It's just ridiculous. So in my defense, I was tired and I had a glass of Chardonnay and I was weak. But enough of that. I'm here today with Trae Holiday, the host and producer of Converge Media. Hi, Trae.
Hi, how are you, Rachel?
I'm doing well. Thank you also for hosting me. Tell me about this space that we're in.
Yeah, this is an amazing space. It's actually called Black Dot Underground, and it's been really the space of so much organizing in the Black community in particular, and it's going to be closing this month, so I'm glad that we're able to spend this time here today.
Yeah, me too. So for those not familiar with Converge Media, what's the kind of elevator pitch for that?
Converge Media is a Black-owned media company that really spotlights and amplifies the stories that are not often told from global majority communities, particularly Black community. We feature so many different business owners, amazing stories, the great work that's happening when it comes to events, arts, entertainment. I mean, you name it. We're really trying to be on the ground telling the stories that aren't told.
I love that. I think we have that in common about storytelling and trying to get that word out to the public. So a little bit about you. You're the host of The Day with Trae, where you interview community leaders, musicians, politicians, and more. You're also the host of Equity Rising podcast, where you connect with racial justice organizers across the world. Prior to that, you had a history in working in media, theater, and studios. So is it weird to be the one interviewed, or is this going to be just us answering questions with questions to each other?
No, it's really great because I appreciate being able to be, on your podcast and be on the other side of it. So it's all good.
Yeah, I love it. So I like to ask my guests before we get into the news stories, why are you passionate what you do? So for you, it seems like you have a big history in media. Why are you so passionate about media?
Well, I think it's important for, folks who oftentimes don't have representation to have that. And I'm grateful to be able to be in the space I'm in, especially because, we hear from community members always that, they appreciate what we're doing. Thank you for amplifying that story or that business owner or spotlighting something that's been beneficial to me and my family. And these are, again, those stories that get kind of left on the assignment desk at a lot of major media news outlets. And so we understand the beauty in those stories and the important impact that they hold. So for me, I'm doing this for my community, and I have 2 sons, and I'm always thinking about them. They're kind of my North Star for doing this work, because I think it's important for me to showcase to them that you can do what you love, which for me started at a young age of 9 in media. So I'm grateful to be where I am today.
I love that. At some point, were you in a theater camp or theater?
Yeah. Right? Lots of theater camps. I did a lot of theater, on stages when I was a young person, and then doing it professionally. Oh, wow. Did a lot of TV and film when I was a young girl, commercials, little movies, all that. Bill Nye the Science Guy, that was fun. So I've, had my fair share in front of the camera.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's get into the stories today. We've got 5 for you. So number 1 is there's going to be some changes to the bar exam in Washington State. Nordstrom's trying to take their company private, not public, going back to private. Bellevue Arts Museum closes abruptly. Number 4, Ethan Stowell and Rubenstein. There's a lawsuit going on there. And our last one is about middle schools in Washington banning cell phones. So you ready to get into it?
Absolutely.
All right. Recapping the first article. So this is about the Washington bar exam. So Washington joins Oregon in making it optional to take the bar exam to get employed. That's the headline. When you read the article a little bit more, you still have to do some other things, but such as 500 hours of work or taking other classes or a 6-month apprenticeship. So there's other things, but it is pretty big that they're not going to require everybody to take the bar exam. The court that ruled on this said that it disproportionately blocks marginalized groups from entering the field. And just a few stats on this. So in the past 5 years, there's maybe over 4,000 people that have taken the bar exam, and over a third have failed. So when you think about the workforce, you're limiting so many people that could potentially be lawyers. And then you also think about you want lawyers in suburban areas and not just in Seattle. So I think that was a big reason why this was approved. So a potential downside is that right now Oregon and Washington have this in effect, but the other states don't. So if somebody's practicing law in Washington or Oregon, didn't take the bar exam, but was approved for these other ways. Let's say they want to move to another state, they might have some troubles in that way, potentially. So, Trae, what are your initial thoughts on this? Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, I'll say, it's great to hear that there are some non-conventional ways happening that are surfacing. And I'm in agreement with them. I think, honestly, if you are trying to break down barriers, you do have to be innovative. You have to take new approaches. And that's something that I work to do on a day in, day out basis. So I really appreciate seeing it at this high level. I think we've also know that there's amazing stories about folks who didn't go that traditional route, taught themselves how to be lawyers. We see that with a lot of folks who are involved in the, in the prison system, those who have been previously incarcerated or are currently incarcerated, who learn the law, practice the law on themselves, on their own cases. And so the idea is that, there's other ways to get to that same end result. I like the fact that Washington is joining this effort. And it is unfortunate that you can't practice other places, other states. But, we can actually benefit because there might be a draw,
That's
right?
true.
Of people coming here that
Yeah.
haven't taken the bar.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of brings up for me the difference between school training and testing versus on-the-job learning. So for the events industry, what I do, corporate event planning, there weren't really colleges that were teaching any classes in event planning. Nowadays, you see a little bit more, especially in hospitality. But for us, it was all learning on the job. And I kind of stand by that. Like if I was interviewing somebody and they had a degree in event planning versus somebody that had 3 years experience, I'm going to go with the experience one for event planning. But you don't see a lot of these big tests for industry in industries except for like medical field and the law field. But there's not a ton more. So I agree. I think it's a good thing to kind of change how we're getting people into this workforce. So
I think it's also antiquated. If you think about big tests, that showcase, hey, you can do this, versus you being able to take lessons learned from a failed case and move that into your approach moving forward. I think there's a lot to be said about that on the job piece. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think you're absolutely right. And law doesn't have to be so restrictive in that way. I think when we've seen people get creative, we have also seen people win cases through that creativity. Right. So it's great that we're actually following this way.
Yeah, and then when they interview, they have to prove themselves through through experience and their knowledge versus just I got a 3. I don't even know what the scores are. I got an 380 on this test.
Yeah.
So it talks about this is not great for marginalized groups. What other industries do you think are kind of hard for marginalized industry groups to get into?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, we're ran
sadly.
by, this nation still has such a stronghold when it comes to white supremacist ideologies. And so, there's a lot of industries that could benefit from some diverse approaches or opening up their doors. I think one of the things that is more important, because there's probably a longer list than I can name, but one of the things I think is more important is that people that run industries are really beginning to understand the benefit of diverse staff, the benefit of a diverse workforce. And you see that now more and more. And one of the amazing examples I love to go back to is you think about a factory that produces clothing. When you bring somebody who's on the factory floor, who's doing the stitching and the patterns, you bring them up to the design level. Now you have some innovation of thought because they're able to share all of the experience that they're bringing from the floor of the sewing floor, right? And I think about that for all things, totally. At the end of the day. So, I mean, there's a lot of different industries. One that really comes to mind for me is, ownership. And I mean that in terms of like corporate ownership. You look at corporate businesses and more often than not, you're going to see white men at the top. What does it look like for, Latino women, for Black men, for Black women, for Indigenous folks to be at the top, to bring their lived experience into the way that corporation runs as a business? I think we see that there are examples of that, but we need more of it for sure.
I absolutely agree. Very well said. All right, we're going to move to our next article, which is about the Nordstrom family. So let's just a little brief history. So 1901, let's take us all the way back to 1901. A Swedish immigrant named John Nordstrom comes to America and he starts a shoe store. And then skipping through some stuff, in 1960s, they expand to apparel. And this is all going through the different generations. So right now, currently, Eric and Pete Nordstrom, they're the CEO and president. Their great-grandfather started it. So their great-grandfather was John. That's where we're at in the generations. So in the 1960s, they expand to apparel. And then 1971, they go public. And so now, 2024, is when they're talking about going back to being private. So they submitted the articles about how they submitted a proposal for the Nordstrom family to take over ownership alongside a Mexican department store, I'm going to butcher this, El Puerto de Liverpool. They're proposing to take ownership. They have to take it to the board and the special committee. And Nordstrom would have 50.1% and El Puerto would have 49.9%. Currently, Nordstrom has 30%, so they're trying to kind of buy this all up. What's interesting is that they tried to do this in 2018, submitted this proposal, and the board rejected it. They said, no, you can't. So what I'm curious about is kind of the why behind this. I have some theories. I have some thoughts. One of the things they cited was that, quote, changing dynamics in the retail environment. In my opinion, I think it's just you don't have that pressure of Wall Street of like every single quarter has to have more and more profit, and you have to listen to all of that. When you go private, you have a lot more control. So that was my thought. But what about you? Do you have any initial thoughts on this one?
This is an interesting one because you don't hear about this kind of structure often, right? Once you go public, that's like a huge deal.
Right.
And really like everyone is celebrating that. And so to have the family be thinking we need to go back to private structure, it is interesting because I think there's a lot of things there that the article doesn't touch on that really brews curiosity for the reader. But ultimately, I'm all for families being able to kind of own what they've created. I think the ideas of, being a public entity means that you're better than, or you got to some level of status doesn't necessarily, it might need to change, right? We might need to shift in terms of the way people are spending dollars. And also, if Nordstrom's can continue to provide a great product, at the end of the day, that's what's going to make sure their customers keep coming through those doors. And so, this is a mixed bag here a little bit, Rachel. You know what I mean? Because there are some things that are changing and shifting, and it means that big, entities that all of our eyes are on, like Nordstrom's, making a decision like this could be beneficial for them in the long run.
Yeah, I wonder how it's going to affect other companies if they're going to follow as well. So for you interview people on both your podcast and on your show. Have you interviewed family business owners? I know I saw you interviewed the Facts newspaper. Do you have any thoughts on kind of what sets family business owners apart from others?
Well, I think we need to get back to more family business.
Really?
One of the things that I think has been a detriment to our society is, the next generation not wanting to keep up the family business. We had an amazing barbecue spot here in the Central District called Home of Good Barbecue. And it was unfortunate because when they closed, so many of us cried. I know me and my mom did. Okay.
Yeah.
But it was a huge loss to the community. But it was maybe the kids had moved on. They were doing different things. But we lose some amazing entities in our community when the family business can't continue on. So for me, I see a real value in family businesses being multi-generational. Businesses that are small businesses ran by families really have been the backbone of our economic system in this country. And we can't forget that, right? And so being able to ensure that they have stability, that they can thrive, that, as innovation comes with the next generation, that generation can bring that innovation into the family business is something I talk to my kids about all the time. And we don't even have a family business.
Are your kids going to take over the Converge Media business?
Right? Yeah, I don't even have a family business, but I'm telling them all the time, hey, whatever you go and learn, bring it back to the pot, right? Of this collective pot of brilliance so that our family can be, benefiting from what you're learning. Sure, go and learn. You're making money for Microsoft or somewhere else. Okay, fine. But how are you utilizing the skills you have to then benefit the next generations of our family? I think that's important.
Have you heard, it was on another episode of this podcast where it's a kind of a standard saying where one generation builds the company, the next generation grows it, and the third one ruins it. Commonly it doesn't make it past 3 generations. So that's why I mentioned the fact that they're the great grandsons. That's pretty impressive that Nordstrom's still around. So anything else you want to say about this one?
I just think it's important. I mean, kudos to them for even thinking hey, we probably need to make this a little bit more insulated and that they do have a major partner who could be almost a half owner with them. Kudos to them for thinking outside the box. I think more business owners should be thinking about this because it is going to require someone who really carries the breadth and the culture of that business forward. And oftentimes that's just involved in the family when it starts that way.
Yeah. All right. Our third story is that the Bellevue Arts Museum closes. It's sad. So they cited funding issues, just kind of what you would guess, less donations than they thought, less visitors are happening, the rising costs of operations. They did try to do everything they could with the government, with corporate, with community. They, were saying that people are hesitant to invest in something that already has financial issues. But it may not be permanent. They filed for receivership, which I'm not familiar with that term. I did a little research, but basically it sounds like somebody kind of comes in and helps restructure and organize and potentially reopen. So it sounds like they'll have some staff remaining for this kind of transition period, but the doors to the museum are closed. For you, I brought this in because I know you're very connected to the arts community. What's your connection kind of to the museum community or the art gallery community?
Well, it's interesting because for me, the two kind of go hand in hand. You're talking about preservation. Oftentimes, the museums have great curation of, their exhibits, and you learn a lot. Converge, in particular, has been connected to Museum of History and Industry in a real, relational way.
MOHI. Some people don't know what it stands for.
Yes, it's MOHI. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, right? But also too, so I have that connection there, right? Because, we started with iPhones, and one of the phones that we had during the pandemic and kind of during the protest movement now is in MOHI, and so that's a huge deal for us. Also, a lot of the work we were doing during the protest movement is captured in one of their major exhibits there. So we've had this connection. But I also think too that, this is where you get to learn a lot. When you're talking about museums, you're learning a lot when you go. It doesn't matter what they have there. I've traveled the world and I've gone to museums all over the world, and you go because you're trying to learn something. So this is, essentially a loss to community in terms of, that particular area in Bellevue now not having that as a resource for people to be able to learn. I think one of the things that I love is as a mother, you get to take, you have, large families, or if you have a little bit of money, you can go to museums, right? They have their doors open. And I appreciate that because sometimes you're just looking for something that is a bit more elevated, for your kids to enjoy. And so the kid museums, that was a big deal for me to take my boys there. So I'm connected in a real personal way, and it's sad to see this one close.
It is. I agree. Is there anything with Converge Media? Are they working on any kind of current arts project or media, or is there kind of what is Converge Media working on right now? What's their big initiative?
Well, Converge is always going to be working on production, okay. Right? We have our base TV shows like my show, The Day with Trae, Back to Besa, which is on Fox, also produced by Converge Media. You have, We Live in Color with Deontay Damper. We have some base shows that we have throughout the week, right? Mm-hmm. But also, we're always going to be involved in the stories that are not being put on our shows, essentially. Like we have guests come in, we interview guests. Our shows are also platforms to share those stories. So we got to be out in community. And that's really one of the parts that I love about Converge is not only do we have this TV studio and we're filling, the void there in terms of having these staple of shows, but we're also going to be involved in, groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings and, business openings, business closings, the stories that need to be told in community. So that's always a constant for us.
I was familiar with your media company when I was at the Sports Star Gala Awards event, if you've heard of it. Converge is always on the red carpet interviewing the people. So you're out there in the community, and I love it. Anything else you want to share on this one?
Well, no, I think, lastly, I'll just say, I encourage people to be patrons of our museums and our cultural spaces. They hold a lot. And when we lose it, we sometimes don't know what we're losing until it's gone. Totally. So it's important that we support, that we go, we take our children, we get young people engaged. Oftentimes museums have great programs around internships and getting young folks to understand how to curate amazing exhibits. I mean, there's a lot there. And so I just encourage folks to tap in.
Yeah, I agree. All right, our fourth story is the dads are fighting. Rubenstein Bagels and Ethan Stowell Restaurants are fighting. So Andrew Rubenstein, he started his bagel chain in 2017. And then in 2020, he partners up with Ethan Stowell to open locations together. So they open a couple more in Seattle. And then in 2023, they decide not to continue working together as business partners, but instead Ethan Stowell is going to buy Rubenstein Bagels entirely. That was negotiated last year. And what's happening now is that Ethan Stowell isn't paying. Andrew Rubenstein is suing Ethan Stowell because he says, you were supposed to pay me $100,000 in 2 payments, and he's missed both payments, and he's followed up multiple times. So the other part of that article is that part of the sale last year is also that he can't talk shit. The language said the lawsuit is accusing him of disparaging him because in the agreement it said he couldn't disparage him. So he thinks that that's happening. But the bigger thing is the $100,000. And then just additionally, Rubenstein Bagels, he is going off and he's starting Hey Bagel. It's called Hey Bagel in U Village, and that's supposed to open up in the fall. So basically he's kind of separating himself from the Rubenstein name and opening up his own thing. So I'd be curious to know Ethan Stowell's side of it. I always want to know every side of the story. What questions does this bring up for you?
It's interesting, right? Because you think about business partnerships and how they work, and we don't have the full story as the public, right? Like, as great as reporting can be done on things, we are missing so much of this. And I'm just curious too to understand, is it an issue of having the funds, which, from a public perspective, I don't know that could be the issue, but you never know. Again, there's a lot of nuance to this one that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to Rubenstein? Have you had the bagels?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. I haven't, but not for a long time. But yes, I do like them. When interviewing, have you ever kind of interviewed somebody in the middle of a lawsuit or going through lawsuits, or kind of business partners kind of going through some disagreements? Probably not on air. You probably haven't seen that. But
it's funny. I stay away from it if I can, only because I like to stay neutral. And it's hard when you have somebody who has such a strong opinion on one side and you don't have space to have both opinions. I think it's something in terms of just like journalistic integrity. Yeah. You just want to kind of maintain like, hey, I just want to be neutral here. But also, I think the way that it's played out in community has been interesting too, with stories like that, because community will hear one side, they're trying to hear both sides and make their own decision. But oftentimes it does feel like somebody is wrong and somebody's more right. And that's just the way that these things kind of shake up. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, we'll move on to our last one, which is about middle schools banning phones. So this may not, at first glance, this is a business news podcast, so you may not think that this is business news, but just you wait. I promise. It ties back. So Robert Eagle Staff Middle School, they banned cell phones, and other schools in Seattle and Washington have similar type bans, but it's not district-wide. So each school can kind of decide what they want to do. Some schools are banning it just during class, but you can still use it on breaks or at lunch. Some people are saying just only at lunch you can have it, but there's not a district-wide ruling currently. Other states also have their own bans and rulings. The article mentions Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, but we're going to focus on Seattle and Washington specifically. There's these fabric pouches that use a magnetic device for unlocking. So that's where the business comes in. I think there's going to be a lot more businesses coming up with locking cell phone away ideas and tools. So there's unlocking stations around the school for emergency use, which I imagine, I haven't seen them, but I'm picturing like a fire extinguisher, but like with a phone unlock in there or something. They're $25 a piece, and every student is assigned one. So again, that's where I think the business piece comes in, is that more companies are going to be wanting to offer, win the bid at a school for what they can offer them. Another part of this article I really liked is that there's not a lot of research on the effects of restrictions. I think we're all pretty aware of the effects of being on your cell phone too much, especially with kids. But what is the restriction going to do? How are people going to react? Are they going to feel better when they don't have it at school? Or is the withdrawal going to be too much? All of that. So the University of Washington assistant professor in psychology, Lucia Magus Weinberg, she's the head of International Adolescent Connection and Technology Laboratory. That's a mouthful. I didn't know we had that. That's very cool. Adolescent Connection and Technology Laboratory. They're launching research in Washington. So they're partnering with this middle school to analyze, do they feel better not being on the phone? How are the parents feeling? All of that kind of stuff. And what I thought was also good is that they have to offer replacement behaviors. So they said they're offering, I think like activities like soccer. They're opening up the library if somebody wants a quiet moment. They're not just going to take the phones away. They're saying, here they're offering games. They're putting out board games. They're, doing things like that. So I thought that was smart. But that is the recap. So do you have personal opinions on that? I know you just mentioned you had sons. Do you have some personal opinions on this?
So I do.
Oh, let's hear it.
So I have 2 boys, 18 and 10. So you can imagine, of course, my 18-year-old has a cell phone, had one since he was 16. My 10-year-old does not. And just about every other week, maybe once a month, somebody is like, how come he doesn't have a cell phone? Especially it's like a young person who's trying to connect with my son. Because young people have cell phones. I am not a proponent of that. He does not have one. I was very reluctant to even get him a gaming system. I just am one that's like, preserve as much as I can in the time I can with him. So I'm all for this kind of ban. I think the usage of cell phones has, I don't know, quintupled since they came, more 10 times over, right? We can do so much more on them now, and they're with us all the time, and we're always on them. People are always scrolling, and I'm just not a huge proponent of it. I think it's really not benefited us as a society. I think there's some benefits. Let me explain. I think there are some great benefits because now you can connect with people all over the world. You know, you have a greater opportunity to tap into things that maybe you wouldn't if it was only regulated to your area. So I think that there's obviously great benefits. There's also amazing technology with the apps and AI, and there's all kind of things that are coming out. But I do think that we're missing parts of human connection because we don't need it, right? Like, well, we need it, but we think it's replaced by what's on the phone, and it's not, right? And so I think over time, it's going to take really decades for us to understand the crux that, you know, cell phone usage has on us as a society. I'm glad that the UW is involved here because studying something like this is really important to understanding how to move it forward, right? When we try to have everything at the palm of our hands, you know, right at our fingertips, you know, is it good for us or, you know, is it bad? It's probably a mix of both, but we won't know until we start really studying it. So I'm glad that this study is happening.
Me too. And they were saying that research dictates policy. So it's much easier to make policy changes or, you know, banning everything district-wide when they have the data to back it up. The arguments against this that I've seen commonly is, you know, people being like, it's so much harder to coordinate, you know, pickup times or if dinner, what to have for dinner or coordinating times to hang out with my friends, whatever. And I think it's hard because all of those arguments are going to fall on deaf ears for anybody that's 30 or above, because all of us are going to be like, well, we did it. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to empathize, I think, for me, because obviously I know the world is different, but in my mind, I'm like, we did it. Like we survived. It's fine. I think you can go to school without it. The one argument that I do have, it's going to be a little harder to counter, is, you know, what if there's an emergency? What if that we're seeing a lot of gun violence in schools? If there's an active shooter, you obviously want your kid to be able to have their phone to call you or call the police or what have you. So I know you're pretty passionate about this topic. I saw you go on TV about this. What's something you want the public to know about gun safety?
Wow. I mean, wow. It is unprecedented, you know, what we're dealing with. You can't predict it. I think now we are trying to work to be more prepared in public spaces, specifically schools. My son wasn't in public school. My youngest son wasn't in public school until the last half of last year. He started in 4th grade. Before that, he was in a very small, kind of almost homeschool collective environment. Mm-hmm. And that was intentional for me. So when I think about the preparation that it takes right now, I think we've learned a lot in the last decade or 3 decades, right? We've learned a lot since Columbine. I kind of go back to that. Yeah. But it's unfortunate because guns in and of themselves are more readily available to young people. And so we're seeing this, right? Like they can, you know, do 3D printing with guns now. They can find ways to, you know, get guns on the street that are unregistered. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that young people get guns in their hands, or that other people who are adults then, you know, who may have some mental instability target school areas based on their own issues, right? Whatever they may be. So I think this is definitely something that's important. And when you talk about banning cell phones and it being connected to those emergencies, yeah, what would we have done, you know, back in the days? You know, in the 90s, I think about going to Garfield, and if something was to happen, what would we have done? You know, at that time, we had access to payphones, at least. Yeah, maybe there would have been a long line for the payphone.
Yeah, we'd all be at the principal's office.
Right. Yeah. We'd all be trying to use the office phones. But it's interesting because now payphones are not readily available like that. And so I think about, we used to be able to dial 0 and get the operator to actually
connect
a call for us, complete a call for it. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
So like there was other ways that we would have been able to address it back then that may not necessarily exist now because of the access to technology. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there because it is important that people are able to tell their families. I think about that for my 10-year-old, right? Yeah. He does not have a cell phone. If something was to go on, somehow somebody else would have to call me. He knows my number by heart. Mm-hmm. He'd have to use another type of device to call me or let me know. Or the schools at this point now have that system where they can send out a message with the click of a button, right? They can send a text message to every parent, right? Every parent's cell phone, they can send a message directly to them. So there's some ways that they would still be able to do that, right? It may not necessarily require all of our kids to have their own device in their pocket.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think gun violence is a whole separate podcast, but I know that it was a passionate topic for you, so I wanted to be able to give you some space to talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Before we close out, I always want to ask a guest, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Wow.
And or I guess if you come up with yourself, what's some advice for our audience?
I just guess I get to go back to what my mom shared. So it's two things. My mom shared with me when I was growing up. She always would say, just be fluid and flexible. And I received that, and I work to model that every day. And then in my adult life, understanding kind of some of the ways of like our ancient ancestors, the understanding that they took every challenge and saw it as an opportunity for growth. And it has completely changed the way that I move as an adult, just to understand that, wow, let me be grateful for these so-called challenges, right? That I get to utilize them as fuel and utilize them as opportunities for my own personal growth. That stress is a choice. I don't have to choose it, right? So like all of the ways that I get to move are really based on how I control and program my responses to things in life. That changes the game for me. So those are some
I love that. Yeah, no,
nuggets of wisdom.
That's great advice. And then one more time, where can people find you and your shows?
Yeah, absolutely. Converge Media, that is whereweconverge.com. You can find The Day with Trae there. You can also look up The Day with Trae, Trae, on YouTube. I'm there. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Trae Holiday.
Perfect. Well, Trae, thank you so much again for sitting down with me, taking the time, and hosting us here. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rachel. It's been a blast.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.